So as mentioned, the cash flow statement describes operating, investing, and financing activities, and there could be 8 possible outcomes from plus to plus to minus, and minus. So 8 possible outcomes, which, combination is a good combination when you're, analyzing a company. Which cash flow statement is ideal for a company that's growing? Which cash flow statement is ideal for a company who's mature? Obviously, as you would imagine, cash flow from operating activities should be positive. So most good companies have positive cash flow from operating activities. So it should be either cash flow outcomes 1, 2, 3, or 4. Investing activities, well, it depends by case, by industry or each individual case or company, but usually a good company keeps on making investments. So investments, they include investment in capital expenditures in property, plant, and equipment. It could be investments in other companies like acquisitions. It could be investments in research and development. So any investment usually a company makes is for the future, and usually that's what makes a very good company. So usually cash flow from investment should be negative. So outcomes 3, 4, 7, or 8 is necessarily a good cash flow statement. And lastly, financing activities. There's no correct answer to which is better, but when the company has sufficient, they have to make an investment eventually, and if they have sufficient amount of cash flows, and if that cash flows can be covered up by only the operating activities itself, you don't necessarily need additional funding. So in those cases, cash flow from financing could also be minus. So you're earning so much money from cash flow from operations. You can reinvest from that operations, and then you can also reimburse to the shareholders or the debt holders. So outcome 4 is, I think, the strongest of all. But on the other hand, outcome 3 is also a very plausible situation, because they're making so much investments, though the cash flow from investment is so huge that they cannot fund everything from their daily operations. So they have to make additional financing activities in order to make investments. So this is not necessarily a bad thing. And this is what happens. Not all companies have the same outcomes year by year. Sometimes a company can have outcomes 4 for the past 3 years, and then next year when they have to make a huge investment, the cash flow statement can look different. So outcomes 3 is also a very common cash flow statement, especially when companies make a very huge investment. So outcomes 3 and 4 are very common. Outcome 7 is also very common, where it indicates that the company is not yet making cash flow from operations. So it's a cash outflow at this moment, but still the company is making huge investments and making, and funding these operations and investments by financing activities. So what's happening is, in outcome 7 is usually startups. Startups, maybe Tesla a couple of years ago, they didn't have any profit. They couldn't make cars. They used all the money for capital expenditures and R&D. So they needed a lot of funding. They used it to invest and do operations. Outcome 7 is a typical outcome for growth stage companies or startup companies. So usually these 3 outcomes are common and described as a sound cash flow statement, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the other outcomes are always bad. We need closer looks, and we need closer analysis to determine whether or not it's a good cash flow statement. But usually the initial stages have cash flow statements that looks like this. In the growth stages, and for your information, we have Toyota, we have Shake Shack Burgers. They're still funding, and they're using the investments for using the fundings for financing for big investments, and while they're still making profits from operations. Companies in their mature stages like Apple, McDonald's, or ExxonMobil, they have a huge cash inflow from operations, and they use it to reinvest and pay out dividends and repay the debt holders and so on. So this is a typical cash flow statement combination. And as you can see, we haven't really discussed the details of the cash flow statement, but as a whole, it's relatively easy to understand the cash flow statement. Now let's move on and try to understand the accrual basis, the income statements, and the balance sheet, and then come back to the cash flow statement for more.